Oliver, who else but you can go? Stop refusing already. Come on, I'll even get you a bonus. I'll make sure they increase your premium. The man remained silent, thinking tensely. Should he agree to his boss's proposal? Stop acting like a woman. I'll increase the bonus by 1.5 times. I need a specialist to go there and check everything. You used to be a foreman. You won't be fooled. Come on, sign the agreement, and that'll be the end of it. A bonus increased by 1.5 times would be a significant boost to his salary, however. His wife was unlikely to be happy about this news. Their anniversary was coming up in just a few days. They had planned to go to their favorite restaurant, the very place where they had met and where Oliver had proposed to Natalie, and now it seemed they wouldn't be going anywhere. But a date was just a number on the calendar. They could celebrate their anniversary a week later. After all, what mattered was the mood of the heart, and when Natalie was near, Oliver's heart sang. Many, said love, only lasted 3 years, but Oliver hadn't noticed that in his own life, he and Natalie had been together for almost 5 years, 4 of which they had spent in a happy marriage. The only thing missing was children, but that would come with time. First, they needed to get on their feet, pay off their mortgage, and then they could think about kids. The mortgage payments were already minimal, just 8 months left, and the apartment would fully belong to them. Thanks to Oliver's parents, who had helped with a hefty down payment, and Natalie's parents, who had helped furnish the apartment, they were close to achieving financial freedom. A salary increase would only help pay off the debt. Even faster, Oliver sat down, signed the agreement, and sighed heavily. Now, he had to figure out how to explain it to his wife. She would definitely complain and grumble at first, but would understand eventually. However, he knew she would pout for a while. He pictured her chubby cheeks and the way she'd purse her lips into a pout, intentionally, of course, to make him feel guilty. Oliver smiled. The thought warmed his heart. When he got home, he found Natalie standing by the stove. He kissed her on the cheek. Natalie glanced at him and frowned. "Why do you look so mysterious?" she asked, stirring an aromatic stir-fry that made his mouth water. "Good news or what?" "Well, I don't know if you'd call it good," Oliver shrugged. "I have to leave on a business trip tomorrow evening. I'll be gone for at least a week. I need to check the construction site and make sure the builders aren't cutting corners. You know how it is. Nothing beats first-hand supervision." Oliver expected Natalie to be upset. But instead, she smiled and seemed to be lost in thought. He was surprised, but soon enough, she did exactly what he had anticipated. She pouted and started breathing loudly. "But it's just for a short while." Oliver tried to reassure her. "Who cares about short? It's our anniversary. You knew that, and yet you still agreed to this trip, Oliver. I didn't expect this from you." He felt guilty and lowered his head, however. Later that evening, she climbed onto his lap while he was watching TV, rested her head on his shoulder, and whispered that she would miss him terribly. "You won't even have time to miss me," he chuckled, hugging her. "I'll be calling and texting you all the time." The next day, Oliver flew to another city where they were building a new factory. There was far more work than he had expected. Inspection from the client, and hadn't had time to cover up their mistakes. As a result, there were many corrections to be made, all under Oliver's strict supervision. One afternoon, in the company cafeteria, Oliver ran into his old school friend, Alice. She was an engineer working for one of the contractors and had also stopped by for lunch. Chatting with her felt like a breath of fresh air. Work had exhausted him, and his wife always seemed to be busy, constantly saying she was too tired to talk for long. "So, you must be married by now," Any kids? Oliver asked after sharing how lucky he had been to meet Natalie. No, not married. No kids either. Alice sighed. Got divorced 6 months into the marriage after my husband hit me for the first time. Swore I'd never go through that again. Honey, Oliver clenched his jaw. Raising a hand against a woman was the lowest thing a man could do. He suddenly recalled a moment from their school days when he had stood up for Alice, and she had kissed him on the cheek in gratitude. Back then, he had been too afraid to confess his feelings, thinking she wouldn't be interested. She had been his first love. But now, it didn't matter. That evening, as he walked Alice back to her hotel, he casually blurted out, "You know, I had the biggest crush on you back in school. Thought you were the coolest girl ever." Alice looked genuinely surprised. "Really? Funny, because I liked you too. More than just liked you, actually. But I guess it wasn't meant to be. You have Natalie now." "Yeah," Oliver nodded. "I hope you find your person too." A few days later, Oliver boarded a plane home. He expected his wife to be waiting for him in a silk robe, with a bottle of champagne chilling in the fridge. They would celebrate passionately before finally opening that bottle. But when he entered their apartment, his heart stopped. Loud moans from the bedroom cut through the air, sharp as a knife to his soul. The sound shattered his eardrums, ripped through his chest. He didn't want to go inside. He pressed his back against the wall, slid down to the floor, and clutched his head in his hands. They were so caught up in their passion that they hadn't even noticed the door open and close. "This is incredible," a man's voice said. A feral rage rose within Oliver. He wanted to go in there and tear that bastard apart. "Oh yes," came Natalie's voice. Natalie's voice. "I've never experienced anything like this before. Shall we go again? You said your husband would be home soon." "I'd rather not get thrown off a balcony," the man replied. "Relax. He won't be here for another 3 hours. Then he'll get stuck in traffic, so I'll have time to freshen up before he arrives. Now, come on." Only then did Oliver realize he had told Natalie his local arrival time, forgetting about the time difference, and in a way he was grateful. Better the bitter truth than a sweet lie. "Don't bother," he called out. "Unbother." "Already here." A second later, his wife burst out of the bedroom, gasping for air, frantically tying her silk robe. Her hands were shaking, her eyes darting around in panic. She was guilty, but she didn't feel guilty. She was just afraid of his reaction, afraid that he would destroy everything in his fury. "You have a month," Oliver said coldly. "Pack your things and take the furniture your parents bought. Leave the keys with my mother. I never want to see you again. And never want to see you." "That's it? You have nothing else to say?" Natalie asked, stunned. "What do you expect me to say? You want me to punch him? No, you're not worth it. Neither of you are." With that, Oliver left. He called his boss, who had asked him to stay at the site for a year. Initially, he had refused, thinking Natalie wouldn't want to move. "I'll take the offer," Oliver said. "For as long as you need me." 6 months later, he and Alice met again at work. One day, as they absent-mindedly bumped into each other in a corridor, her papers scattered everywhere. As he helped her pick them up, they kissed for the first time. A year later, the construction was finished. Oliver and Alice moved in together. One evening, as they were looking at houses, Alice said, "I think we should buy a house, not an apartment." Why?" Oliver asked. She smiled, stroking her belly. "Because we'll need a yard for a swing set and a sandbox." "Wait, you're pregnant." "Just found out 10 minutes ago." She grinned. "So house or not?" Oliver laughed. "House it is, but first, we get married." The wedding was small but beautiful. Oliver and Alice didn't want anything grand. Just a modest ceremony with close friends and family. After everything Oliver had been through, he no longer believed in extravagant celebrations of love. Love, he had learned, wasn't about fancy weddings or expensive rings. It was about trust, loyalty, and the quiet, everyday moments that made life meaningful. After the ceremony, Alice moved in with Oliver, but they didn't stay in his old apartment for long. He had no desire to live in a place that held painful memories, so he put it up for sale. Surprisingly, Natalie never contested the property, likely out of shame. Or perhaps guilt. Regardless, Oliver had no intention of ever seeing her again. As the months passed, he and Alice built a life together. They found a beautiful house with a large backyard, perfect for the swing set and sandbox Alice had envisioned. Oliver threw himself into work, using the long hours to distract himself from the scars left by his past marriage. But Alice was patient. She understood his wounds, and instead of pressuring him to move on faster than he was ready, she gave him the space he needed to heal. One evening, as they sat on their porch, Alice resting her head against his shoulder, she suddenly chuckled. "What's funny?" Oliver asked. "You," she smiled. "You're so serious all the time. When we were kids, you were always laughing, always making jokes. Where did that boy go?" Oliver sighed. "He grew up. Life wasn't kind to him." Alice squeezed his hand. "Then maybe it's time we bring him back." And somehow she did. While Oliver was building a new life, Natalie's world was crumbling. At first, she had convinced herself that he would come back to her, that, after some time apart, he would realize he still loved her, that he would miss her. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and the truth became undeniable. He was gone. Man she had cheated with. He vanished the moment he realized Oliver wasn't going to just forgive and forget. Natalie found herself alone in the apartment that no longer felt like home. The champagne she had once chilled for Oliver's return remained unopened. Robe she had worn that night was now stuffed at the back of her closet, a reminder of the biggest mistake of her life. She tried reaching out. Messages. Calls. Even showing up at his old office once. But Oliver never responded. Not once. Eventually, she stopped trying. She thought about dating again. But something was different now. She wasn't the same person she had been before. Men could sense it. The desperation, the loneliness. She wasn't desirable anymore. Just lost. 2 years passed. Oliver and Alice were now parents to a beautiful baby boy, Ethan. Oliver had never known a love like this before. The moment he held his son for the first time, something inside him shifted. All the pain, all the bitterness, it faded, because finally he had something real, something pure, a reason to keep moving forward. One day, while Alice was out with Ethan, Oliver stopped by a cafe for a quick coffee. He was stirring his drink absent-mindedly when he heard a familiar voice. Oliver. He turned, and there she was, Natalie. She looked different. Older. Not physically, but something in her eyes. The confidence, the charm. It was gone. For a moment. Neither of them spoke. Then she smiled, but it was a sad smile. "It's been a while." Oliver nodded. "Yeah. You look good," she said. "I'm good," he replied honestly. She hesitated before speaking again. I heard you got married." "I did? And a baby too?" Oliver nodded. a small smile playing on his lips. Ethan. He just turned 1. Natalie swallowed hard. I'm happy for you, she whispered. Though the pain in her voice was evident, Oliver said nothing. After a moment, Natalie exhaled. Shakily. I regret it, you know. I know, Oliver said simply. She blinked, as if expecting something more. But there was nothing more to say. Whatever they had once been to each other was gone. Take care, Natalie, Oliver said, finishing his coffee and standing up. And just like that, he walked away, leaving her behind exactly where she belonged. In the past, Oliver walked out of the cafe without looking back. He didn't feel anger, sadness, or even satisfaction. Just peace. Seeing Natalie again had confirmed what he had already known. He had made the right choice. As he stepped onto the busy street, he pulled out his phone and called Alice. Hey, love, she answered, her voice light and warm. Hey, Oliver smiled. How's Ethan? He just finished smearing mashed bananas all over himself, she laughed. And the kitchen, and me, Oliver chuckled. Sounds like I'm coming home to a mess. You love it, Alice teased. He did. He really truly did. Listen, I'll grab some dinner on the way home, he said. Anything specific you want? Surprise me, she said. Just don't forget dessert. I never forget dessert. After they hung up, Oliver took a deep breath. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. 2 years ago, he had felt like his world was ending. But now, as he thought about Alice and Ethan waiting for him at home, he realized something important. His world hadn't ended. It had just begun. Back at the cafe, Natalie sat frozen in place, staring at the door Oliver had just walked out of. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Reuniting, apologizing, maybe even rekindling something. But in the end, she had been nothing more than a footnote in his story. And she had written herself out of it. That night, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went home, sat on the floor of her empty apartment, and cried, not because she wanted Oliver back. She knew that ship had sailed, but because for the first time, she truly understood what she had lost. She had always thought she could get away with everything. That Oliver would always be there, always love her. She had been wrong. The realization was crushing. In a moment of desperation, she picked up her phone and typed a message. Natalie, I know you don't owe me anything, but can we talk? Just once. She hesitated for a moment, then pressed send. The message delivered, but the reply never came. Oliver didn't even read it. Time moved on. Oliver and Alice built a life filled with love, laughter, and quiet moments of happiness. Had another child, a little girl named Sophie, and their family felt complete. They bought the house Alice had wanted, built the swing set, and spent weekends making pancakes in the kitchen while the kids ran around in their pajamas. Simple, and that was exactly how Oliver wanted it. Every now and then he would think about his past. Not with bitterness, but with gratitude. If it weren't for what had happened, he might never have ended up here. With the woman who truly loved him, with the family he had always dreamed of. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alice came outside and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. What are you thinking about? She asked. Oliver smiled, pulling her closer. Nothing, he said. Everything. Alice kissed the top of his head. You happy? I am, he whispered. I really, truly am. And for the first time in his life he meant it.